is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Russia says it's met its goals, but Ukraine says it's winning the battles as Moscow declares a change of tactics. But several loud explosions are reported in the western city of Lviv after an apparent Russian airstrike. US President Joe Biden meets Ukraine's foreign and defence ministers during his visit to the Polish capital, Warsaw. And refugees find safety far from home as countries including Greece welcome those fleeing Ukraine. The western Ukrainian city of Lviv has been hit by a series of powerful explosions which have wounded 5 people. It comes despite Moscow saying it had achieved most of its goals in the first phase of its military campaign and would now focus on securing Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. We spoke to AP reporter Kieran McQuillan a short time after the blasts.
So yes, I'm here in western Ukraine. There have been airstrikes in this area, so much for this pivot to Donbas that the Russians were talking about in that defense ministry briefing yesterday in Moscow. They were talking about halting their ground campaign and concentrating on the east of this country. I'm in the very west of this country, very close to the Polish border. I'll just step out of the camera now just to let you see what has happened here in this city that I'm in at the moment. You can see the smoke billowing up from behind a hill not far from where our live position is. We heard the sound of airstrikes, 3 large booms thudding at about half past the hour, which would have been about 35 minutes ago now. The windows in our apartment started to rattle, and we went out onto the terrace and we could see white smoke, which is now, as you can see, has turned into black smoke billowing up from an undisclosed location. We don't know what has been hit, where exactly that is, but that is somewhere in this city in western Ukraine. I'm being very general here because there are certain restrictions on naming places at the moment until the authorities have actually come through with an actual description and an actual location. So we have to be very general at this point when we describe what we're describing that you can see on the screen in front of you. 3 large explosions heard about 35 minutes ago. White smoke initially. This is now the aftermath of that. Whatever is on fire there, it looks like it's a very large fire raging behind this hill that you can see there on the screen. There's also a smell of some chemical in the air. Very difficult to ascertain what it is, but there's a definite smell around now.
Ukraine's defense minister says he feels cautious optimism after a meeting with US President Joe Biden. Alexei Reznikov met Biden in Warsaw, along with Ukraine's foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba. Biden is in Poland on the second leg of his European visit. Andrew Wilson reports.
It's important for the Western effort that Joe Biden is in Europe. Unity is a crucial factor, and back home there's an American public that still believes Biden could be tougher over the war in Ukraine. The president has already visited an American Air Force base in Rzeszów, across the border from Lviv in Ukraine. There are now 100,000 US troops stationed across Europe. And he reassured the Polish government that America was always ready to defend an ally as long as it's in NATO.
The United States and my colleagues on this side of the table have heard me say it many, many times. We take Article 5 as a sacred commitment, not a throwaway, a sacred commitment that relates to every member of NATO.
First event on Saturday was a high-level meeting, Joe Biden presiding over Ukraine's foreign and defense ministers with head of the US State Department and US Defense Secretary at the table. after which the Ukrainian delegation seemed encouraged.
Today, we did receive additional promises from the United States on how our defense cooperation will evolve. We are grateful to the United States on this military thing. And another aspect is sanctions. But when it comes to sanctions, the transatlantic unity is the best way forward.
Joe Biden is also meeting refugees under Polish care as well. There are different strands to this campaign, and White House policy will be crucial to all of them. Aid, support and potential homes for those already displaced and grieving from this war, a number already in the millions. Weapons, shoulder-fired missiles, anti-tank weapons, ammunition, small arms, grenades, the list is long. US Congress is keen to bolster the Ukrainian war effort in any way, bar taking arms itself. And on a more global level, help with the economic stresses that are already starting to bite.
Bad news is they're in the breadbasket of the world, Ukraine and Russia. But we, the United States, are going to do our part because we're the third largest producer of wheat in the world. And our Canadian friends are going to do the same thing. But we're going to try very hard. But in the meantime, the suffering that's taking place now is at your doorstep.
Washington and Warsaw haven't seen eye to eye in recent years, but the welcome has so far been warm and positive. But Poland, like Hungary and the Baltic states, is on the Russian border and feels the pressure. It will continue trying to persuade its American ally to do more. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
I've been speaking to Piotr Kaczynski, senior expert at the Bronislaw Geremek Foundation in Warsaw, about Poland's changing role in Europe.
Position has basically changed between January and March completely, almost completely, from being one of the countries in the back fighting for the rule of law to one of the countries on the forefront to safeguard democracy in Europe. So that's quite a change.
And given where it is in the world, how important is it for the NATO response to have Poland on side and use its perspective as a country that's had hostilities with Russia in the past?
It's absolutely crucial. On the one hand, Poland and the Baltic states and some of Central Eastern European countries as well as Nordic countries have been advocating that Russia is a rogue state before it turned into a terrorist state and Vladimir Putin turned into a war criminal. And this was not something that many of Western European or American allies wanted to hear for many years. So that's the perspective that prevailed, the perspective of Central Europe and Baltic countries on how to perceive Russia. And the second relevance is, of course, being at the eastern flank of NATO. This is a borderland between NATO and, if we use Biden's language, autocratic regimes. Belarus is just on the other side, and then Russia, of course. So defending NATO borders in Poland, in the Baltic states, in Romania is something that is of number one priority for the US and Washington.
And Poland has also responded by taking in the bulk of the refugees from Ukraine, which is another turnaround on its previous stance.
Absolutely. Only a year ago, we had this situation with Belarus where there were hundreds and thousands of refugees and migrants crossing illegally from Belarus into Poland, and the response of the Polish government was to build a wall. This time around, it's a completely different response. We have received over 2.2 million refugees from Ukraine into Polish lands, and some of them moved on, over 200,000, for example, into Germany already. So we see that there is a huge influx, and the welcome that the Ukrainian refugees receive in Polish towns and cities is absolutely phenomenal. This has been incredible. Only where I am right now, where President Biden is, that is city of Warsaw, a city of 2 million people, has welcomed 300,000 people over last month alone. So new inhabitants, if you like. And so you can imagine that it stretches the capacities of local government and cities. But this continues to be a very welcome environment for the Ukrainian refugees, which is in a way surprising to where we've been a year ago or what was the response of the Polish government to the migrant crisis in 2015, when the Syrians, for example, were in millions coming into Europe, and Poland shut down its doors completely, did not receive a single refugee from Syria, and then there was some very nasty language being used against the refugees. The same people today tell a completely different story.
Russia's threat to use nuclear weapons is fueling a dangerous arms race. That was the message from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky as he addressed the Doha Forum of oil-producing nations in the Qatari capital. He said Moscow was blackmailing the world and that its destruction of Ukraine's agricultural infrastructure would increase food insecurity. The Ukrainian leader called on the assembled countries to produce more oil to alleviate global reliance on Russian energy.
The future of Europe rests with your efforts. It depends on your efforts. I ask you to increase the output of energy to ensure that everyone in Russia understands that no country can use energy as a weapon to blackmail the world.
The war in Ukraine has displaced more than half of the country's children. Children's charity Unicef says more than 1.8 million young people have crossed into neighbouring countries as refugees, and 2.5 million are now internally displaced. CGTN's Mung Ching-shung spoke to UNICEF spokesperson James Elder.
In Ukraine, the situation is very desperate because we see hospitals attacked, we see schools attacked, we see this increasing change in warfare where residential areas, where families are coming under fire. Women are giving birth in bunkers. So we're very, very worried about the situation for children here in Ukraine. But then you've got almost 2 million children have had to flee. That means that they need schooling, they need, trauma care, support. Across this nation, children are, they're seeing what war looks like. They're seeing their parents separate. They're saying goodbye to their father. So there's a great deal of stress and trauma that we need to address as well.
How is the crisis impacting children in general? What strategy is UNICEF employing to get them the help and support they need?
So the biggest thing UNICEF is doing is really two parts. One is on trauma and one is on life-saving supplies. So we send, for example, medical supplies, oxygen, surgical equipment, obstetric equipment, because again, women are giving birth in bunkers. So UNICEF sends that to hospitals from Kiev to Kharkiv to Dnipro to here in Lviv. Water purification tablets, generators to pump water, because again, water systems are being hit. So a lot of life-saving equipment going around the country. And trauma. We have child protection teams that work in between the lines of conflict to try and reach children. We have kits, hundreds of kits, just early childhood development, recreation kits, anything that can try and give a child a bit of normalcy, give them a break from this. So it's on those two fronts. It's life-saving and it's mental health.
What more can be done by the global community to help ease the pressure on child refugees, both in Ukraine and around the world?
First and foremost, any pressure to stop the war. That's the most basic. The surest and safest way out of this horror show for children is for the fighting to stop. But UNICEF is not a political organisation, so what we then ask for big international actors to do is at least get an ability of these humanitarian corridors to be respected, so families can leave safely and organisations like UNICEF can go in with life-saving supplies, whether it's Mariupol, who needs water because it's another city being suffocated. So peace, humanitarian corridors, and then humanitarian assistance. If we are going to keep having to put band-aids on this horrible scenario for children, at least we need those emergency medical supplies, those blankets, that food. All of those things are going to be increasingly needed if the fighting continues.
Still ahead here on CGTN, finding new homes for Ukraine's family pets. The volunteers helping thousands of animals abandoned amid the war.
The British public not only need to know, but they want to know more about China.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
East meets West. We're now at a time when we need the icebreaker spirit.
My first impression when I came to China is I noticed the similarities more than the differences.
It's about understanding each other's culture. we look at the things that bring our nations together.
My dad is Chinese, my mom is English. I grew up in London, but I went to China to work at age 25.
Whenever I've gone to China, it's just been amazingly welcoming.
The music is beautiful language and bring all the people together.
I'm exploring, I'm experimenting, I'm trying something new, all in the hopes to build a bridge. And I think we definitely need more people doing that.
It was only when I got to know my Chinese father in my 40s that I really got to know the other half of myself.
I hope we make it another 50 years, another 500 years.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dared to think beyond the horizon and to open up our world, on TV and online on CGTN.
I hope that you will all become icebreakers and bridge builders.
This week on Razor, getting the world ready to recycle batteries from electric cars. And we look at the risks to aeroplanes from 5G technology.
If there was a complete problem with the altitude setting, you just wouldn't see anything here, or you could be getting misreadings.
So you'd be flying blind if you're ultimately...
Exactly.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Russia says it's met its goals, but Ukraine says it's winning the battles as Moscow declares a change of tactics. Several loud explosions are reported in the western city of Lviv after an apparent Russian airstrike. And US President Joe Biden has met Ukraine's foreign and defense ministers during his visit to the Polish capital, Warsaw. Well, let's get more now on Russia's apparent change of focus in the war in Ukraine. With its announcement, it would now concentrate on securing the country's eastern Donbas region. Moscow's new media law severely limits what correspondents in Russia are able to report. So let's talk to our correspondent John Beaver in the Latvian capital, Riga. John, what more do we know about what's behind this Russian change in strategy? What's Russia saying about it?
Well, it gives Russia the chance to say that it is achieving its objectives. It's certainly not managing to sweep through Ukraine as quickly as it was certainly hoping to. So by narrowing down on a specific region, it allows the Kremlin to say that it is achieving its goals and very much paint that as a positive picture. At some stage you would imagine Vladimir Putin will stand up and say that they are being hugely successful with all their military aims. You would expect that to come fairly soon. But for as much as we've heard all of this talk about the focus being on the eastern part of Ukraine and the Donbas region, as you mentioned there, we've heard about a series of explosions, 3 explosions in Lviv, just 50 miles away from the Polish border, not far away at all from where US President Joe Biden was today. So it's all very well the Russians saying one thing in terms of the focus being placed on eastern Ukraine and maybe southern Ukraine as well, and trying to form a land bridge between the south and the east to link up some of their troops to improve supply lines, things like that. But very much Russian forces remain in place throughout the country. Airstrikes and we assume missile strikes as well are continuing throughout the country as well. And the war really being taken to the western edge of Ukraine now, with this strike, as I say, just 50 miles from the Polish border.
And John, we've had more talk today from Moscow about military strikes on Ukraine, and the defence minister has reappeared after speculation about him.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a man we hadn't seen for 12 days at one stage, Sergei Shoigu. Now, there was some talk that he might not be very well. There were rumours going around Moscow that he might have had a heart attack, was one theory. Another theory was that he was very much being held up as the scapegoat by the Kremlin, the man responsible for the stalled invasion and things not going as well as certainly senior members of the administration would have hoped for, and Vladimir Putin himself, obviously. The defence minister is a personal friend of Vladimir Putin as well. They apparently go on hunting and fishing trips together, or they certainly did before the invasion started. So it will be interesting to see what more we see of him. We've got this video that we're not entirely sure when it was filmed of him talking to other senior Russian generals. At one stage he appears to sort of slur his words as well, which might give some credence to the theory that he's had some health problems. And yes, Russia keen very much to focus on military strikes that it says have been successful. So there was one missile strike, they said, on a warehouse that was housing ammunition and weapons, another missile strike on a fuel base supplying southern Ukraine, and then we've seen these 3 explosions in the west of the country just recently as well. So we would expect that we'll hear more about that, probably, I would imagine, tomorrow now, coming out of the Kremlin.
John, many thanks. John Beaver there in Riga. The majority of Ukraine's refugees are fleeing across the border to neighbouring countries, but some are finding shelter further away, including in Greece, which has pledged to take in thousands of families. Evangelos Tsipsas reports from the Bulgaria-Greece border.
Greece's border with Bulgaria has changed in recent days and weeks. The dominance of Bulgarian trucks has now been overtaken by vehicles for those holding blue passports with a gold emblem. At the Promahona border check, Greece's northern border crossing with Bulgaria, hundreds of Ukrainians wait in line for hours every day, having left their old lives and loved ones behind.
My family, my mom and dad, now at Donbass, and they live in war for 8 years, and I live in Kiev. And after this situation, we decided to move because it's awful to be in Kiev. What will happen next time, next minute?
The recently arrived are becoming part of the diaspora. Some plan to stay in Greece with friends and family, while others say they will travel on further.
Russia has launched this attack. It's a large-scale special operation. It's a large-scale war. And Russia doesn't stop and keeps on bombing. There's a lot of fear. We've been here for several days, but everything I think is going to be fine. And we're heading to Athens. 3 million people have already left our country. They are refugees.
My family can't go to Italy because there was little children. My sister 4 years old. So she can't go in Italy, she stays in Ukraine, and I alone going.
After a difficult journey, the refugees are being welcomed in a nation which has been on the front line of the continuing refugee crisis from Syria and Iraq, where more than 1 million people have arrived in Greece since 2015. The country has struggled to deal with that influx, putting a strain on resources and communities at a time when Athens was also battling a financial crisis. Despite these ongoing issues, Greeks have opened their arms and homes to Ukrainians. The vast majority enter the country through Promachonas, where specialized offices from the Ukrainian embassy have been set up to speed up the process.
We are here to provide any information needed. Once they enter, we provide them with pamphlets where they can find a phone number and an email in case they need to ask any questions. We also provide sandwiches, juice boxes, coffee or tea. They can charge their devices and they can even rest in our indoor facility. Generally, we provide them with anything they need to make their lives easier in Greece.
The number of refugees crossing through the border behind me have increased in recent days, as 700 to 800 make the crossing daily. So far, there are 12,000 Ukrainian refugees in Greece, with 4,000 of them being children. Things here at this border might seem calm for the moment, but as fighting intensifies in Ukraine, there are concerns that problems experienced in previous refugee crises could be repeated. Evangelos Tsipsas for CGTN from the Greek-Bulgarian border.
As well as people needing new homes, animal welfare organisations are rushing to get Ukrainian pets to safety, as many are left abandoned at border shelters. At a Hungarian border crossing with Ukraine, Mia Alberti met some of the volunteers trying to find those pets a new home.
And this is Nyofi, and they are also refugees. They were found in Ukraine and brought to this shelter on the Hungarian border under any cause care. In the last month, she has rescued 50 dogs.
It's not their fault that there's a war going on or what the situation is like. They're hungry, they're not safe, so we're helping in any way that we can.
Susie is also under Eniko's care. She didn't come alone. Susie was found by herself on a train from Ukraine. Locating these dogs' owners is almost impossible, Eniko tells me. Even those who come forward after can no longer keep them.
A man told me he was on the run with his family and they just let the dog go. He thought it was best to let it go so the dog could survive. After all, I still think it's more humane than many people who leave their animals locked up in their houses or chained up.
More than 400 dogs are now under Eniko's care, much more than the shelters can handle. Some are staying in her house. Before the crisis, border shelters like these were already overloaded and underfinanced. Finding dogs homes to make space for others is urgent, but not easy.
There are strict rules in different countries, particularly obviously we're focusing on the EU because of the logistics of transport, the length of time. They don't want animals coming in bringing rabies. It's not fair on society, it's not fair on other animals already in the country, it's not fair on humans. So we need to make sure that we focus on getting everything all legit and done, and when the animals come, they are healthy and ready to be adopted into whatever country they end up going to.
Sandy's animal charity is setting up an adoption program across Europe. The response, she says, is overwhelming.
Hundreds and hundreds of emails. Everybody wants to adopt. But it's not even just the Ukrainian dogs. I've had people, which is great, wanting to say, well, we'll take the border shelter dogs of Hungary, Romania, so we can make room for the Ukrainian dogs. People want to help this kind of process and flow. So, yeah, unbelievable. People are just incredible. They're opening their hearts, their homes to these animals. And they're like, give me the dog that's 3 legs, one eye, has mange, or, is very sick and is just about to die, and give that dog to me. I'll mind them.
Well, it really doesn't matter where they came from. Now these dogs are all here, and like the rest of them, the best thing that can happen to them is just one, getting adopted by a new family. Mia Alberti, CGTN in Zahonia, in the Hungarian border with Ukraine.
Our headlines again. Russia says it's met its goals, but Ukraine says it's winning the battles as Moscow declares a change of tactics. But several loud explosions are reported in the western city of Lviv after an apparent Russian airstrike. And US President Joe Biden has met Ukraine's foreign and defense ministers during his visit to the Polish capital, Warsaw. He says he's not sure whether Russia is changing its military strategy. That is the world today. Thanks for watching. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK 24 hours a day on Freeview. There's more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's The Agenda. For now, from all of the team here in London, goodbye.